Okay, so think about this for a second. The Super Bowl is on. Literally 100 million people are glued to their screens, screaming at their TVs, losing their minds over a touchdown. And then, there's that one person in the room, sitting there, completely unbothered, maybe scrolling their phone, maybe genuinely confused about why everyone else is acting like the world is ending over a football game. And you know what's wild? That person gets judged for it. Like, what's wrong with you? How do you not care about this? People look at them like they're some kind of alien. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets genuinely fascinating. Science actually has a very clear explanation for why this happens, and it has nothing to do with that person being broken, antisocial, or emotionally unavailable. It comes down to how their brain is literally wired. The psychology behind it is deeper than most people realize, and honestly, once you understand it, you'll never look at the "I don't watch sports" person the same way again. So let's break this down, because what's really going on inside the mind of someone who genuinely, completely does not care about sports is way more interesting than you'd think. All right, so here's where we start. And this first reason is going to hit different because it's all about what's happening inside your brain. Psychologists have this concept called reward sensitivity. Basically, it's how strongly your brain reacts to certain kinds of stimulation. And here's the deal. Not everyone's brain is tuned to the same frequency. For a die-hard sports fan, the second the game clock starts ticking, something lights up inside them. The competition, the unpredictability, the tension of not knowing what's going to happen next, their brain is eating that up like it's the best meal they've ever had. It releases dopamine. It triggers excitement. Their whole nervous system is locked in. But for someone who doesn't care about sports, those exact same elements, the crowd noise, the scoreboard, the rivalry, just don't land the same way. Their brain isn't registering it as exciting. It's not that they're forcing themselves to be bored, it's that the reward signal simply isn't firing. Think of it like this. You know how some people absolutely cannot get enough spicy food, and other people take one bite and are completely done? Same heat, same pepper, completely different experience. That's reward sensitivity in action. So when someone tells you they just don't get the excitement of sports, believe them. Their brain genuinely isn't processing it the way yours might be. And that's not a character flaw. That's just neuroscience doing its thing. But reward sensitivity is only one piece of this puzzle. Because the next reason, it gets into something way deeper, who we are and how we figure out where we belong.
So we just talked about how the brain processes reward differently for different people. But here's where it gets even more interesting, because this next part isn't just about excitement. It's about identity. It's about who you are and how you connect with other people. There's a well-known concept in psychology called social identity theory. And the basic idea is this: humans are wired to find belonging through groups. We want to feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves. And sports teams? They are literally one of the most powerful group identity machines ever created. Think about it. You put on that jersey, you rep those colors, and suddenly you're not just some random person sitting in a stadium. You're part of a tribe. It's us versus them. Your city against their city. And that feeling of shared identity, of being united with thousands of strangers around one common cause, that is deeply psychologically satisfying for a lot of people. But here's the thing. Not everyone seeks belonging that way. Some people build their identity through ideas, through creativity, through individual achievement. For them, a sports team rivalry doesn't scratch that itch because they're not wired to find their sense of self through group affiliation. They might feel just as connected through a tight-knit friend group, a creative community, or a shared intellectual passion. The need for belonging is still there. It's just being met in a completely different way. So when someone says sports fandom feels unnecessary to them, they're not saying connection doesn't matter. They're saying they found their tribe somewhere else entirely. And that leads us straight into the next factor, because a huge part of why people end up in different tribes comes down to something that happened way before adulthood. It goes all the way back to childhood. Okay,
So this next one is honestly one of the most underrated explanations in the whole conversation. Because a lot of people assume that if you don't like sports, you must have tried it and rejected it. But that's not even how it usually works. Here's the reality. A massive amount of our strongest interests are formed during childhood. Like the things you got excited about as a kid, those neural pathways got reinforced over and over again, and they basically became part of how your brain is wired as an adult. So, if you grew up in a household where Sunday meant football on the TV, where your dad was losing his mind over the playoffs, where your whole family had a team, your brain built an emotional association with sports early. It became comfort, it became family, it became identity. And that stuff sticks. But flip the script. If you grew up in a household where sports just weren't a thing, maybe your family was into music, or books, or business, or something else entirely, your brain never built that connection. Sports weren't part of the emotional landscape of your childhood. So, as an adult, when someone tries to get you hyped about a game, there's genuinely nothing there to tap into. No nostalgia, no emotional anchor, nothing. And this isn't about deprivation or missing out. It's just about what your environment taught your brain to care about. Research backs this up hard. Early exposure is one of the strongest predictors of lifelong interest in sports. So, honestly, a lot of it comes down to the home you grew up in. And you can't really judge someone for that. But here's where it gets really fascinating, because even beyond childhood, there's something about the way certain people think that makes sports feel like a bad fit, and that's coming up next.
All right, so we've covered brain wiring, identity, and childhood. But this next one is going to resonate with a very specific type of person. And honestly, if you've ever heard someone say, "I just find sports boring," this is probably exactly what's going on with them. It comes down to cognitive preferences, basically the way your mind naturally likes to work. Some people are deep thinkers. They're drawn to things that involve complex analysis, long-term problem solving, abstract concepts. They want to sit with an idea, turn it around, pull it apart, and figure out what's really going on underneath the surface. These are the people who get obsessed with philosophy or dive into research rabbit holes at midnight, or can talk about psychology, hey, kind of like right now, for hours without getting tired. And here's the thing. For those kinds of minds, sports can feel repetitive. Like, at surface level, it's the same game played over and over again with different outcomes. Now, and this is important, sports absolutely do involve strategy and complexity. Anyone who's studied game film or dug into analytics knows that. But the perception for abstract thinkers is that it doesn't scratch their intellectual itch the same way. Studies on cognitive styles back this up. People who lean toward abstract thinking tend to naturally gravitate towards science, philosophy, art, technology, fields where the depth feels endless and the questions never fully get answered. It's not that they think sports fans are shallow. It's just that their brain is constantly hunting for a different kind of stimulation. And sports, at least on the surface, doesn't always offer that. But cognitive style is only part of the story. Because there's also something happening on the emotional side of things, and this one might be the most relatable explanation yet. Okay, so this one right here, I feel like a lot of people are going to hear this and go, "Oh, that's literally me." Because we need to talk about the emotional side of sports. And I don't mean the fun part. I mean the full roller coaster. Think about what being a real sports fan actually involves emotionally. One week, your team is on fire and you're on top of the world. Next week, they blow a fourth-quarter lead and you're genuinely devastated. Your mood on a Monday morning is directly tied to what happened Sunday afternoon. You're riding these massive highs and crashing into these brutal lows, and the whole cycle just keeps repeating itself season after season. For a lot of fans, that's the whole point. That emotional intensity is exactly what makes it worth it. The pain makes the victory sweeter. They're fully in it. But for other people,
That same roller coaster sounds absolutely exhausting. And that's not weakness. That's actually a documented psychological tendency called emotional regulation preference. Some people naturally gravitate away from situations that create unpredictable emotional swings. They'd rather invest their energy into things that feel more stable, more controlled, more internally rewarding. Maybe that's creating something. Maybe that's building a skill. Maybe that's deep focus work where the outcome is in their hands, not decided by a referee's call in the final 2 minutes. It's not that they can't handle emotion. It's that they'd rather spend that emotional energy somewhere that feels more worth it to them personally. And honestly, that's a completely valid way to be. No judgment there, but here's the last piece of this puzzle, and this one's actually kind of interesting because it flips the whole narrative. Because it turns out, not caring about sports might actually say something pretty powerful about a person's mindset.
All right, so here's the part that I think genuinely surprises people when they hear it. Because everything we've talked about so far has been about what someone lacks. Less reward sensitivity, less group identity seeking, less emotional investment. But this next piece, it's actually a strength. Research in personality psychology shows that people who are less influenced by social norms are significantly more likely to diverge from widely accepted interests. And think about what that means in the context of sports. Sports are arguably the most universally shared form of entertainment on the planet. The NFL, the NBA, the World Cup, these aren't just games. They're cultural institutions. Entire social calendars are built around them. Conversations at work revolve around them. First dates involve them. Not engaging with sports in a lot of social environments is genuinely going against the current. And yet, some people just don't. Not out of rebellion, not to be different for the sake of it, but because they're naturally wired to follow their own internal compass rather than defaulting to whatever everyone else is doing. Psychologists call this independent thinking, a lower susceptibility to social pressure and a stronger tendency to pursue personal interests regardless of whether they're mainstream or not. And honestly, in a world where so much of what people do is driven by what's trending or what everyone else is watching, that's kind of a rare quality. So the person who shrugs and says, "I don't really follow sports," at the cookout, they're not antisocial. They might just be one of the most independently minded people in the room. And when you put all of this together, the brain wiring, the identity, the childhood, the cognitive style, the emotional preferences, the independent mindset, what you get is a really clear, really human picture. And that's exactly what we're wrapping up with next. So here's where it all comes together. And I want you to really sit with this for a second, because I think it reframes everything. Not caring about sports does not mean someone lacks passion. It does not mean they're boring, emotionally unavailable, or socially disconnected. Because here's what's actually true. Every single person who doesn't care about sports, they care deeply about something else. Maybe it's music. Maybe they can talk about artists, albums, and sounds for hours in a way that makes a sports fan's eyes glaze over. Maybe it's technology. They're the person who reads every single spec sheet for a new product launch and gets genuinely fired up about it. Maybe it's business, or psychology, or fitness, or film, or cooking, or 100 other things that light their brain up in exactly the same way a championship game lights up a fan. The passion is there. The excitement is there. The obsession is absolutely there. It's just pointed in a different direction. And this is the core truth that psychology keeps coming back to. Human behavior is shaped by a combination of personality, environment, and cognitive preference. None of us chose our wiring. None of us chose the home we grew up in or the way our brain processes reward. We just ended up here, drawn to the things that genuinely move us. Sports happen to be one of the most powerful and widespread ways people engage with the world, but they've never been the only way, and they never will be. So, next time you meet someone who looks completely blank when you bring up last night's game, don't write them off. Ask them what they do care about, because I promise you,
the answer is going to be a lot more interesting than you'd expect. And that right there is the psychology of why some people just don't care about sports. Not a flaw, not a gap, just a different kind of mind doing its thing.